The sprinklers were running when Detective Maria Santos pulled into the driveway at 47 Elm Street. It was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and the automatic irrigation system cast eerie shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. Steam rose from the warm pavement where the cold water hit, creating an almost ethereal fog that seemed to dance around the crime scene tape. What Maria found behind that pristine white picket fence would shatter everything the small town of Millbrook thought it knew about evil. The call had come in just after midnight. A neighbor reported screaming, then sudden silence. But when police arrived, they found something far more disturbing than a domestic dispute gone wrong. In the backyard, beneath the prize-winning rose garden that had graced the cover of Better Homes and Gardens just 3 months earlier, lay the body of renowned landscape architect Elena Voss. She was buried up to her neck, soil packed tightly around her shoulders, her lifeless eyes staring up at the October moon. The killer had left her there like some grotesque garden ornament, a final cruel joke in a life dedicated to creating beauty. Elena Voss wasn't just any victim. At 42, she was the queen of suburban landscaping, the woman who transformed ordinary backyards into magazine-worthy masterpieces. Her waiting list stretched 2 years long, and her clientele included celebrities, politicians, and old-money families who paid premium prices for her artistic vision. She lived alone in the house she'd inherited from her grandmother, spending her evenings sketching garden designs by lamplight, her golden retriever Murphy sleeping at her feet. But Elena harbored secrets beneath her carefully cultivated exterior. 3 years earlier, her younger sister Carmen had died in what authorities ruled a tragic accident, a fall from Elena's second-story balcony during a family gathering. The insurance payout had funded Elena's business expansion, allowing her to purchase the expensive equipment and rare plants that set her apart from competitors. Some whispered that the sisters had been arguing that night about their grandmother's will, about Elena's controlling nature, about money that had gone missing from Carmen's trust fund. Elena's romantic life was equally complicated. She'd been involved in an on-and-off relationship with Marcus Webb, a married city councilman who'd been promising to leave his wife for over a year. Their affair was an open secret among Millbrook's elite social circle, and Marcus had been Elena's champion in securing lucrative municipal contracts. But recently, Elena had grown tired of being the other woman. Friends said she'd been pressuring Marcus to make a choice, threatening to expose their relationship if he didn't commit. The night of October 15th began like any other. Elena had spent the day working on the Henderson property, installing a Japanese maple grove that would be her final project. Her assistant, 24-year-old Jake Morrison, had helped her load the truck with tools before they parted ways around 6 p.m. Elena drove home to her quiet street, waving to her neighbor Mrs. Chen, who was retrieving her mail. Security cameras captured Elena's truck pulling into her driveway at 6:43 p.m. She was alone. Phone records would later reveal that Elena received 3 calls that evening. The first, at 7:15 p.m., was from Marcus Webb, a heated 15-minute conversation that neighbors reported hearing through her open kitchen window. The second call came at 9:22 p.m. from an unknown number, lasting only 37 seconds. The final call, at 11:48 p.m., was from her assistant Jake, but Elena never answered. By then, she was likely already dead. Mrs. Chen told investigators she'd heard Elena's backyard gate creak open around 11 p.m., followed by what sounded like heavy equipment running. She'd assumed Elena was working late on some project. It wouldn't have been unusual. Elena was known for her perfectionist tendencies, often working under floodlights to meet impossible deadlines. But at 12:03 a.m., Mrs. Chen was jolted awake by screaming that seemed to come from Elena's garden. Then, abruptly, silence. When Detective Santos arrived at the scene, she found Elena's body positioned with chilling precision. The killer had used Elena's own tools, her industrial-grade spade, her soil compactor, her irrigation system. The roses above her had been carefully rearranged to create a perfect circle, each bloom facing inward like mourners at a funeral. Most disturbing of all, Elena's fingernails were packed with soil, suggesting she'd been conscious when the burial began, clawing desperately at the earth that would become her grave. The investigation immediately focused on 3 suspects. Marcus Webb had no solid alibi for the time of the murder, claiming he'd been home with his wife, but Mrs. Webb admitted she'd taken sleeping pills and couldn't confirm his presence. Jake Morrison, Elena's assistant, had left work angry that day after Elena criticized his pruning technique in front of clients. His truck had been spotted in the neighborhood around 11 p.m., though Jake insisted he'd only driven by to return tools he'd forgotten. The third suspect emerged when investigators discovered that Elena had recently filed a complaint against her former business partner, Derek Chambers, accusing him of stealing client lists and undercutting her bids. Each suspect had means, motive, and opportunity. Each had intimate knowledge of Elena's schedule and access to her property. Each had been spotted in the vicinity that night. As the investigation deepened, Detective Santos uncovered a web of financial betrayals, broken promises, and festering resentments that painted Elena not as an innocent victim, but as a woman whose ambition had created dangerous enemies. The first trial focused on Marcus Webb. Prosecutors painted him as a desperate man caught between two women who chose murder over scandal. They highlighted his political ambitions, his fear of exposure, and most damning, a life insurance policy he'd secretly purchased for Elena 6 months earlier. The defense countered that Marcus genuinely loved Elena and was planning to leave his wife after the election. The jury deadlocked 8-4 for Jake Morrison's trial 6 months later revealed a darker story. Court documents showed that Elena had discovered Jake skimming money from supply purchases, padding invoices, and selling expensive plants on the side. She'd confronted him the day before her death, threatening to file charges and blacklist him from every landscaping company in the state. Jake's defense team argued that Elena had been a manipulative employer who'd driven him to desperate measures through constant humiliation and threats. This jury convicted Jake of second-degree murder, but the conviction was overturned on appeal when new evidence emerged. DNA found under Elena's fingernails didn't match any of the primary suspects. Instead, it belonged to Thomas Brennan, a convicted felon who'd worked briefly for Elena's company 2 years earlier. Brennan had been fired after Elena discovered he'd been casing client homes for potential burglaries. But Brennan had an airtight alibi. He'd been in county lockup on a parole violation the night Elena died. His DNA presence was explained by contamination from tools he'd used years earlier. The case took another shocking turn when Derek Chambers confessed in a suicide note, claiming he'd killed Elena in a rage over stolen contracts. But forensic experts proved the note was forged, written by Chambers' business partner who was trying to frame him for insurance fraud. The real Derek Chambers had been in Las Vegas the night of the murder, his alibi confirmed by casino security footage. 7 years and 3 trials later, Elena Voss's murder remains officially unsolved. Marcus Webb lost his council seat and moved away from Millbrook, his marriage destroyed by the scandal. Jake Morrison works construction in another state, still maintaining his innocence. Derek Chambers closed his business and became a recluse, bitter over the years of suspicion that ruined his reputation. But Detective Santos, now retired, believes she knows the truth. In her final case notes, never made public, she writes about the one person who had access to Elena's property, intimate knowledge of her schedule, and the physical strength to carry out such a methodical murder. Someone who watched Elena's every move from across the street, who knew exactly when she'd be vulnerable, who had harbored decades of resentment over property lines and noise complaints. Mrs. Chen, the 78-year-old neighbor who reported the crime, had been Elena's nemesis for 15 years. Their feud began over Elena's floodlights disturbing Mrs. Chen's sleep, escalated through countless city complaints about noise and property boundaries, and reached a boiling point when Elena's new irrigation system flooded Mrs. Chen's basement. Court records show Mrs. Chen had threatened Elena repeatedly, once telling a mediator that Elena deserved to be buried alive for the torment she's caused. Mrs. Chen's story about being awakened by screaming never quite added up. Phone records showed she'd called 911 exactly 4 minutes after Elena's final, unanswered call from Jake, timing that suggested she'd been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her arthritic hands, which she claimed made gardening impossible, had somehow managed to move Elena's body and operate heavy machinery with surgical precision. The most chilling evidence came from Mrs. Chen's own security camera, which she'd claimed was broken that night. Enhanced analysis revealed it had been manually disabled from inside her house, then reactivated after 2 a.m. In those missing hours, thermal imaging from a police helicopter later showed heat signatures moving between the two properties, patterns consistent with someone digging and filling a grave. Mrs. Chen died of natural causes in 2019, taking her secrets with her. Elena's house stands empty now, the garden slowly returning to wilderness. Sometimes, neighbors report seeing lights in the windows late at night, the ghostly glow of someone still working in the dark. The roses Elena planted still bloom each spring, their roots fed by secrets buried deep in Millbrook soil. The truth about Elena Voss's murder may be more terrifying than any of us imagined. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the obvious suspects, the angry lovers, the desperate employees, or the bitter rivals. Sometimes they're the quiet watchers, the ones who live just close enough to hate you, just familiar enough to destroy you, just patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Justice wasn't served in Millbrook. A killer walked free for 9 years, hiding behind the disguise of a concerned neighbor, a harmless elderly woman who simply wanted peace and quiet. Elena Voss, who dedicated her life to making the world more beautiful, became the victim of evil growing in her own backyard, evil that had been watching her every move, waiting for its moment to bloom. What do you believe? Was justice truly denied, or are there still secrets buried beneath Millbrook's perfectly manicured lawns? Sometimes the most ordinary neighbors harbor the most extraordinary capacity for evil.